largest animal in history still carries the blueprint of a runner. Watch a whale swim. Its spine drives up and down, not side to side like a fish. Fossils add stranger clues: an ankle linked to even-toed hoofed mammals, ears reshaped for underwater hearing, and tiny hind limbs that persisted long after whales took to the sea. But whales did not evolve in a neat march from hoof to flipper. So what really happened between land and sea? Start with the body. A fish usually drives itself forward by bending from side to side. A whale powers its tail vertically, flexing the spine up and down. That pattern fits the way many mammals bend their backs while running. It is an inherited mechanical clue, but not a family record. Different animals can arrive at similar solutions, and movement by itself cannot tell us exactly where whales belong. For that, we need a structure that is harder to reinvent by coincidence. Early whale fossils preserve one in the ankle. And inside that small joint is a signature shared with a particular branch of hoofed mammals. At the center of the ankle is a bone called the astragalus. In even-toed hoofed mammals, it has a double-pulley shape that guides the foot in a distinctive way. When early whale skeletons were found with the same structure, the relationship stopped being only a prediction. Whales belonged inside the even-toed ungulate radiation. Nearby sits Indoeus, a small semi-aquatic rheoelid with dense limb bones and whale-like ear anatomy. It was not a whale, and it was not the animal that turned into one. It represents a close branch near the origin of cetaceans. Modern hippos are close living relatives, not whale ancestors. The ankle identifies the family, but a different bone tells us when that family had already become whale. That bone is part of the ear. Pakicetus had long legs, weight-bearing feet, and a body still suited mainly for life on land. From the outside, it looked nothing like a modern whale. But inside its skull was a thickened wall of the ear bone called the involucrum, a feature strongly associated with cetaceans. Its hearing system was not yet built like that of a modern underwater specialist. The important point is identity. Whale anatomy had appeared before the familiar whale body. Pakicetus was an early member of the cetacean radiation, not a confirmed direct ancestor standing at the bottom of a ladder. The ankle identifies its wider family, the ear identifies it as whale. But neither explains how a land-capable body began moving through water. Ambulocetus shows why this transition cannot be reduced to a single before and after image. It still had strong limbs capable of supporting its body on land, although movement there was probably awkward. In shallow water, those limbs became powerful paddles. Its large hind feet pushed against the water, while the spine flexed to help drive the body forward. It did not swim exactly like an otter, a crocodile, or a modern whale. It combined inherited parts in a new mechanical experiment. And Ambulocetus was not simply the next rung after Pakicetus. These animals belonged to a branching radiation in which different lineages used shorelines, rivers, and shallow water in different ways. Some depended more on their limbs, others increasingly relied on the spine and tail. The transition was not a clean march from walking to swimming. It was a competition between several ways of living in two worlds. And the fossils that follow make that branching impossible to ignore. Now the shoreline opens into a much wider experiment. Pakicetus still had a pelvis and hind limbs firmly connected to the spine, and one pregnant fossil preserved a near-term calf positioned head first. Its describers interpreted that as evidence that birth still happened on land. But another branch had already traveled astonishingly far. Pakicetus, found on the coast of Peru, still had 4 weight-bearing limbs and small hooves, while its tail also contributed to swimming. Its discovery supports a dispersal route across the South Atlantic, while amphibious whales could still move on land. Then Pakicetus shows a different mechanical direction. Its pelvis was no longer joined to the spine for weight support. Its hind limbs were reduced, and its elongated body relied more on undulation through the middle body and tail. It probably lacked a modern tail fluke. These were not snapshots of one species changing in place. They were separate branches testing different balances between feet, spine, and tail. Some still returned to land, others were becoming unable to return at all. That point of no return appears in the Basilosaurids. Basilosaurus was an elongated, fully aquatic whale built for life at sea. Yet near its pelvis sat a pair of tiny hind limbs, complete with recognizable leg, ankle, and foot bones. They were far too small to support the animal on land. Researchers have interpreted them as structures used during mating, although that function cannot be watched directly in a fossil. Dorudon belonged to the same broad marine radiation with a shorter, more compact body. It should not be placed after Basilosaurus like the next improved model. Both were specialized branches among several basilosaurids. By this stage, the pelvis no longer supported walking, and return to land was no longer possible. Whales had become fully marine. But these stem whales were still not the two great living branches. The next transformation would divide the ocean between sound and filtration. Fully marine whales then divided into two extraordinary branches. On one side were the ancestors of toothed whales. Their skulls became increasingly asymmetrical, while specialized tissues in the forehead helped focus outgoing sound. Returning echoes allowed later toothed whales to investigate prey and surroundings in darkness or murky water. But echolocation did not appear in its modern form all at once. Early members of the branch preserved different combinations of hearing and sound-producing anatomy. On the other side were the ancestors of baleen whales. And the earliest members of that branch still had teeth. Some used those teeth to seize prey. Later forms reduced and eventually lost them as baleen-based feeding emerged. The exact transition remains debated, so it should not be shown as one certain staircase from teeth to filtration. Once again, evolution produced several experiments. One branch increasingly explored the ocean through sound. The other transformed feeding on an enormous scale. Yet both still carried structures inherited from mammals that once lived entirely on land. Look again at a modern whale. The forelimb has become a flipper, but inside it remain the familiar bones of an arm, wrist, and hand. The pelvis has lost its old connection to walking, yet reduced remnants remain. The lungs still demand a return to the surface, and the spine still drives the body through the vertical rhythm introduced at the beginning of this story. None of these features means a whale is unfinished. They show how evolution works. It does not begin with a blank design. It modifies what earlier generations leave behind. Whales did not erase the land. They carried it into the sea. Legs became remnants, arms became flippers. A running spine became an engine for the ocean. And the largest animal in history still carries that ancient body plan within it.